Hi, this is Mark Seymour with John Broughton on Retrospectives, Radio 3 SER.
Pretty happy with it.
Of course, it's being released in strange times that we're in at the moment. Was there a temptation at all to delay the release because of the situation we're in?
Look, I vaguely remember conversations around that subject. It's been a while now. I mean, we've lived with it for quite a while, but look, I just think that, at some point we just decided, look, we're better off. We don't know how long this is going to be, and which is proving to be the case. There's all sorts of, crystal ball gazing going on left, right, and centre in the media, but really we just don't know how long it's going to be before musicians can actually play on stages. So, and we cottoned onto that pretty quickly. But that said, we'd kind of put a whole lot of things in place before I went out on the road with Hunters and Collectors. So the ball was already rolling, if you like. And then that tour kind of ended in it just sort of fizzled out because of the mid-February. Just suddenly we weren't allowed to play anymore. So we kind of had to reinvent the wheel around about that time, But that's been the most interesting part of the exercise, really. Just thinking out, how do we adapt to this? And there's been all sorts of... the interesting thing, I think, too, has been the way the media have reacted because of the novelty of actually doing it and going out and advertising the fact that the album's been released, just a general spray, like who's interested in talking about this. And oddly enough, it's actually proven to be a pretty good move, really, because journalists are kind of going, oh, how are you doing this? You're not able to play. What have you got to talk about? And which has thrown more light on the content of the record than we might otherwise have attracted, which is an interesting question, conversation in itself, because there's a lot of storytelling on it. I put a lot of thought into the roots of where the songs had come from, and there was a lot of travel involved, and I wrote the songs over a couple of years, so that proved to be a blessing, really. So in a way, it's kind of been, it's worked. You hear that? It's actually worked well in some respects. I feel pretty. It's not fazing me at all personally. I don't feel particularly challenged by the fact that we can't go out and play music. But at this point, it's probably going to start wearing a bit thin towards the end of the year. But we also basically made the decision. Well, look, this album's got. We're going to commit to it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I've
seen quite a bit mentioned about the fact that you've now released more albums under your own name than you did with Hunters. Does it surprise you that fact would surprise many people?
Look, a few things got launched in the melee of what the record company felt was worth mentioning, and that wasn't something that I kind of pondered particularly. But I'm glad they're saying it. It is actually a good point. It's sort of. I think subtly the people at Liberation are sort of. I've been with them for so many decades now. I've been in the Mushroom Stable pretty much my entire career, and they've sort of had up close personal sort of relationship with all those Hunters and Collectors records, and they every time I put a record out, they still get questions about Hunters and Collectors and when are you going to play next? So they're kind of more aware of it than say another record company might be. But I'm sort of appreciate that I get all that support. There's moral support from them. Hang on, I'll let the dog out of the cage, mate.
Sure.
There you go.
And
anyway, keep going.
A new producer for you this time around, Nick Didia. What did he bring to the table that made him a good fit for you?
Well, in the end, it was a lot of things, but originally it was just look, I just got cued. I got my manager just suggested to me. There were all these sort of conversations going down about, how other artists were shifting direction and, production-wise, and I really didn't have any big ideas in that department. I would have been quite happy to go and make another record with Cameron probably, but I wasn't even thinking about making a record, to be honest. I was writing songs, but I hadn't really given much thought to shifting the process much.
Mm-hmm.
So it really just came down to the classic line, maybe you should just try to do things differently, whatever that meant, you know. And so I just cast a wide net, really. I didn't have any idea. I just, God, you know, how long's a piece of string? And I just, there were a couple of records, Aussie records, that had come out that led me back to him. I mean, Casey Chambers was a big cue, because I think she's a pretty interesting songwriter. Like she's got a very powerful imagination, and she's a great wordsmith. So anyway, I found him through her, and then I looked at his CV and I go, God, this guy's been everywhere, you know. So we just contacted him, and I went up and paid him a visit. I mean, I had no idea what the process would be like.
Yeah.
But in the end, like going up there to Byron Bay and 5 Melbourne guys, and well rehearsed, songs written, everything done. So in the studio, it was just a free for all, really. We just went in there, and he just commandeered the desk and told us what rabbit holes not to go down to. He said one really good line, which I'll never forget. He said, "When musicians start talking, everything goes wrong." And I thought that was just very, very powerful. He's about my age. He's a little bit younger.
Yeah.
But he's just been around the traps, you know. So everything just ended up sounding like he didn't edit. Like it was everything that went into the songs stayed in there, you know. And so the songs just have rich in texture and depth. So when you listen to the record, it just takes you somewhere really quite mysterious. It's got a very mysterious feeling about it, which has a lot to do with Nick, the way he records and mixes. And
it does have very much a live feel about it. Like the whole process was more about capturing a good performance rather than tinkering around with the recorded result. Was that something you really were intent on?
I didn't really know. I mean, see, a lot of engineers will edit post recording, like you take things out, which is arguable. It's not a dumb thing to do, but I think a lot of there was so much homework done with the material. I mean, I literally went up there and I had the lyrics done. Like all my work was done, and I pretty much run, pretty much the last 2 to 3 albums I've approached that way. Just don't go into the rehearsal room unless you know what the hell you're talking about. Like, here's the song, guys. This is what it's about. You know, step up to the microphone. Now, if somebody in the room says this sucks, or what's your reasons? So I've got all my ducks lined up. Then if somebody says they've got to tell me why, and then we have a robust intellectual engagement about the meaning of the song, which is really critical. And that's how you make good records. It's really didactic process. You're talking about the songs. That, you know, I always believe that I work from the point of view of being in a political and historical context. The songs are about me in a certain part of the world, looking out. These are the things that are happening. These are my beliefs. What's going on in the world? How does that affect me? What are these characters telling me? And so there's a lot of thought on that level. Mm-hmm. So if I can say to these guys, this is what this is about, and I said it to him too, then he will react accordingly. Oh, that's what you want. Okay, well then I'll work for that. Rather than going, oh, I don't really know, like sort of that fluffy, vague conversation that musicians will get into and then somebody comes up with a half-baked solution to a problem that probably wasn't there in the first place, you know. Mm-hmm. And, I suppose in the end, I've been doing it for so long that I just arrived at a point where I kind of knew what I wanted. But at the same time, there are a whole lot of things I'm not very good at doing, which is like being an engineer, or I can't play the drums. So just really being realistic about what I could achieve, and just being honest with the people around me, you know.
Now you mentioned you were writing, but not with an album in mind. So how far back do these songs actually go?
Look, 2017. Yeah, look, I can't actually tell you the exact date, but I remember night driving was pretty earth-shattering. I mean, it might have been the first trigger for me. Normally that's what happens. Like something comes along, I get caught up in some incident, and it just snaps me out of my self-obsession. You know, I just go, shit, what am I doing here? What's happening? You know? And that story about Bell Street, Pascoe Vale, it was so colloquial and so local and such a Melbourne story. It really grounded me then. And then we went on a tour of South Africa, and that was kind of, I think, the next thing that happened. And I wrote a song when I was there, and that really rocked me. Like, going to South Africa was just an incredible experience. Just a really fantastic country, just really robust and beautiful, and you know, there's people who have suffered for so long, and it's just been the scene of so much carnage, you know, and yet it's just got this, it's an incredibly gutsy place, and I just felt really, I just got really immersed in it.
Mm.
So it's probably about 2 years ago. Yeah.
And that was the song Cliptown Mud that came out of the South African trip, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Just go back to night driving. There is an incredible story behind that song, the incident there. Can you just relate that to us?
Yeah. Look, it's funny, I've told it a few times now, and the people who are involved in it, they probably realise now they've been. But I was just driving, literally mindlessly out driving my car. I just was doing one of those things I occasionally do just to get out of the house, you know, clear my head. And I was on this loop around the top of Melbourne, and you sort of can't quite. I sort of took a shortcut. I ended up going along Bell Street. I used to live up in that part of the world, and I was just kind of being a bit melancholy, you know, and just got past Pentridge, Sydney Road, and I was just continuing on, and the road was just rising up above me. It would have been about sort of like that sort of yellow hour around 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and it's just not a lot of people around, and there's cars sort of in front of me. And I'm just coming over the hill, I'm heading towards the CityLink entrance, and I see a body in the middle of the road, right? And I'm looking through the windscreen, and there's a body in the middle of Bell Street, lying in the middle of the road. Now, I've never seen that before. Like, how often would you ever encounter something like that in this, you know, safe, affluent life we've got? And then it moved, and I realised, it's a hit and run. So my immediate thought is someone's been hurt. So, and the car in front of me, the next thing that occurred to me, and this may all have happened over a really short period of time. I mean, when you recollect these things, you think they take a lot longer than they actually do in the end. But the cars in front of me drove around the body and kept going, and that really hit me. That was the switch, because I just thought I couldn't do that, you know. Got to it. It turned out I got past, nosed the car into the curb, got out of the car, put the hazards on, jumped out of the car, ran back to the body, and as I'm getting to her, I can see it's this girl, and she would have been in her 30s probably, and she's smart casual. She's been out somewhere, and it's like she's been crossing the road and she's been hit. Anyway, a guy comes running out of the pavement on the southern side, yelling at me, "It's okay, mate. It's okay, it's all right." And he grabs her and picks her up, and I'm looking at them both, and she's got her eyes wide open, like really bug-eyed, and he's looking at me and goes, "It's okay, mate, she's an epileptic." And he starts sort of half dragging her across, like he knows who she is. And I thought, I better not take that for granted. So I followed them over, and I looked into her eyes, and I said, he's leaning against the fence. And I said, "Are you an epileptic?" And she nods her head and goes, "Yeah," like this. And I thought, this is just, this is just incredible. You know, like, I can't believe this is happening. And anyway, he's saying, "Thanks, mate, thanks." So clearly what's happened is that they've been crossing the road, and she's just had a fit in the middle of the road. Yeah. And she's fallen over, and I've just come over the hill as it happened. But I still was left, anyway, I got back in the car and drove off, but I was still left with the feeling that the people in front of me must have seen something and just gone past.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that really affected me. Like, it made me start thinking about the difference between your own consciousness that you carry around all the time and what the actual world is like, and that gap of perception, the difference between what you believe is true and what is actually true. And that really got my brain working. I started thinking on a much deeper level for a long time. I think all the songs kind of sort of erupted out in the following months, basically because I'd had that experience, you know.
Right, so it took a little bit of time for the songwriter in you to kick in and think, oh, wow, there's a song in this.
Well, I think the thing with songwriting is that it's really hard work, and you've got to dig. It's really, you've really got to take a lot of risks psychologically, and you sort of, in a way, you don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if you're a character, like an actor, you don't really want to do the job. It's demanding, and so I tend to try and just push the process away, even though I write all the time. But I think songs themselves, they have to speak on a really special level to be good. They have to have this really sort of, they have to live in neutral territory, that you have to sort of let go of your own experience, and if they're really good songs, they just become, they cease to be yours.
Yep.
And it's really difficult to to allow that to occur. Yes, it's anyway. So but once you're committed, you know eventually you're going to get around to doing it.
Yeah.
And once the ball starts rolling, then you sort of stay in that world for quite a while, you know. But each time a new record comes, like each time I make the decision to make a record, it's just always it's always just more and more. It's becoming more and more difficult, I have to say, as I get older, and the time between them is longer, I think. But you just really want a big dividend. You know, you want to know that you get to the end of it and you go, which is why I took the risk with Nick Didier, because I remember when I mentioned it to the record company, I distinctly remember one of the guys looking and go, we weren't expecting that. You know? But anyway, it worked out all right, man.
It's a fantastic band you've got, The Undertow. It must be a massive advantage going into the studio with an established band that you've worked extensively with, rather than an ensemble of session players. So you're obviously extremely comfortable with these guys.
Yeah, and it's just evolved, really. I mean, they were people that they're really good friends, and there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of mutual support. The quality of the relationships, and you know, like I did spend a long time, you know, early on in my solo career was, you know, a bit of a revolving door, and it's no one's fault particularly. You're just sort of looking for some sort of level of musical intimacy that doesn't have to be talked about, and it either arrives or it doesn't, you know. And I just think that with this group, when John Favaro joined, I think that was a real pivotal moment. Cam, and not that it's saying anything about Cam and Matt, but I mean, they're great guys, and you know, they're really talented, and they've got great intuition. But when Sabzi came along, he just has a particular. It just meant we could create scale with very few people.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So is the procedure of presenting songs to these guys for their input a different procedure to how it was back in the day with Hunters?
Yep. But look, the thing is getting back to what I said earlier, the thing that I've learned is that I've got to have my shit worked out. Like, basically, even if it changes, because there is always the energy created by people in a room together, it is going to affect the outcome. You can't not. If you want dynamic, powerful performance, you've got to be able to work in that environment.
Yep.
And the outcome for me is critical. It's like, I want this to blow people's socks off. It doesn't always happen. You know, you set the bar there. So, but the difference between now and Hunters is something I've learned over a very long time, which is that I have to know what I'm talking about. This is what I've got, guys. This is it. This is why it's the way it is. I have these reasons, so I can stand there in front of everyone and I can verbally explain what this is about. I mean, clearly. I mean, I know it's not particularly rock, but that's the approach I take. But then again, I trust them, so they're prepared to sit there and listen to me talk, Whereas with Hunters, it was much more, I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't say adolescent, but it was just young guys playing their instruments loud and wanting to conquer. It's very rudimentary, simple rock and roll passion. And if something didn't work, oh well, chuck it, move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not really looking at analysing why it didn't work. Because at the end of the day, that's my problem. Whoever's doing the writing, that's the problem they have to deal with. It's not really anyone else's problem. And for me, that's the big shift. Like me, I say, okay, this is my problem. I've got to fix it. Whereas in the old days, I just run away.
I saw where you mentioned a lot of the songs were triggered by travel. Is it common for you to get inspiration for songs while driving or in flight or whatever means of transport you're on?
Well, it's sort of like pretty much, but it's sort of by force of necessity, really. I mean, I find the idea, when I first went solo, I thought I've just got to cover all bases, and I ended up getting caught up in, digital multi-track world, sitting in front of your computer and just creating file lines and, that's just like so uninteresting, And then gradually I just realised, well, I've just got to be able to do this with my hands. I have to be able to play the song, physically with the guitar, just strip it back. What can I do? What am I good at? What are my limitations? So if I can do it like that and it's emotionally convincing, record that and then take that to the band, right? So it is incredibly basic. And then but see, the boys go, oh yeah, okay, what's that? Oh, yeah, I like that. Oh yeah, I like that. They just react to it really. Oh, nah. It's this very simple emotional response, and if I keep focused on that, I get results. Whereas, I've tried it in different ways. But the thing is, if you travel light, if you just record, if you write that way, you can do it anywhere. It can just happen in a motel room or take notes on the plane. But being, surrendering to that process means you can start looking out at the world wherever you are. You're not sort of bound by any particular criteria. So traveling actually became a sort of a thing in itself. I started really looking at that. I mean, I was kind of nibbling at it for a while, like with the previous couple of records, but with this one, I really kind of went there, like we did this trip I went with my partner Joe across the US quite recently, post-Trump, before the virus, but that kind of got into the record as well. And that was just really interesting, like, because I wasn't doing gigs, and we got on trains and, we got into these little towns and just met some really interesting people that, you'd never cross paths with across Australia, Especially the US too. The US is sort of like, we have this view of it, this kind of like this monstrous thing that's just sort of bouncing around and it's being led by an idiot, and you go, well, what's going on, with that country? But it's actually pretty benign most of the time. You're sort of just moving around, like walking up and down the road and, getting into these little towns, and people are really nice and, yeah, can I help you, sir? But they've got this whole cultural agenda that's just floating in the ether, and you're being a writer, I just looking at it and going, well, what does it actually mean?
Yeah.
What are those people really thinking? And you don't really know, but it's sort of, you start knowing, it just alerts you to being in a place like that in these times. It really alerts you to the level of alarm that people are carrying around in their minds, and it's just fruit for the imagination, really. Yeah, I suppose.
There's a real element of history on the album as well. Have you always been fascinated by history? You've been a bit of a history buff through the years?
That's not really. I wouldn't call myself a buff. I'm a student, really. I was brought up with it. My mother was a history teacher, and she just was a huge, devoted to history. And, it's sort of, just, I was an adolescent in the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of dialogue around the table about why that war happened, and how the Catholics were involved in it, and the conflict between Catholicism and communism, and why that was important. And I vividly remember that now, especially now. But we're living in, and my parents were children of the Depression and the Second World War. They came through a period in history that was possibly the most catastrophic period in human history, and they emerged in the 50s as adults with a particular set of values, which we attacked. And I look at them now. One's very old and the other one's not there anymore. But I look at them now and I go, it really affects my sense of time, Yeah. And so going and back now, as I have recently, I'm acutely aware of the debris and the ruins in that cover the world, just how scarred the planet is by human occupation, and I'm just really interested in all of that, And I've tried to populate these songs with these images that are tied to that sense of a kind of a landscape populated by ruins and the scars of history, and this reference to middens and in Slow Dawn, and I had a recollection of my father being really cautious and afraid of some of the kids that I might have been mixing with when I was a little boy in some of these Victorian country towns. That wasn't something I would have thought of when I was in my 30s and my 20s. But now it's like, we're Australia grappling with its history now I can feel the change because I'm old enough to recognise that. Like when I talk to my daughters about race, they just take it for granted that there's a problem. Whereas when I was a kid, we just didn't. It never occurred to us that there was actually a problem. We just didn't know.
Yeah.
And and that's tectonic, I think, for Australia. Very painful.
Very.
But it's really very painful, but it has to happen. I think anyway.
One song with a historical element and geographical reference as well is Dogs of Williamstown. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, well, I've got this mate, Donna Jackson, who's a theatre director, and she's always egging me on to write songs about the West, and which began with a theatre production I worked with her on called We Built the City, which was pretty much about the building industry in Melbourne, and I wrote a song about Westgate, the Westgate Bridge collapse, and that kind of started the relationship. So ever since then, she's kind of like been throwing little curveballs at me, like, what about trying to write about this and that and the other thing? And as time's gone by, the latest chapter was she got me on this ghost tour of Williamstown one night, which is very weird. And I don't know if you're familiar with those little jaunts, but regional towns in Victoria have them. Well, they might have them in Australia actually, but you can find them. Just Ballarat's got one, Bendigo's got one, and you meet other people who booked into them at a pre-agreed location, and then this man arrives out of the dark in a top hat and then proceeds to take you on a journey through the back lanes of Williamstown, and then tries to suggest to you that we can hear voices now, and then starts telling you about the legends of Williamstown. And it's like Williamstown has got this unconsecrated, well, as far as I can, I may have my facts not quite right, but there's all this fallow ground over near the beach, which is unconsecrated because there are bodies of convicts not that far down.
Oh, wow.
And there was a convict settlement there, and they were in the boats off the bay, and they were used as free labour to mine bluestone. And a lot of the bluestone around Melbourne was used was dug up by these guys, you know. And then there was this quasi uprising, and a bloke named and what's the name of the guy I referenced in the beginning of the song? Oh, John Price got murdered. So it's kind of like a dark gothic tale, and then it's somewhere in the midst of the tour, the guy says, "Now, if you listen carefully at midnight, you might hear sounds of dogs howling in the dark." And then I immediately made an analogy with the Western Bulldogs Football Club. So I thought, I've always wanted to write a song for them, which I probably never will, but that I ended up thinking of a big chorus. The dogs are Williamstown. Anyway, that's what that song ended up being in there. Yeah.
Now, the current situation with the virus has left all of us at home with a lot of time on our hands. Have you been particularly creative during lockdown?
I'm just writing prose. I'm not sure whether it'll ever see the light of day, but yes, I am working. Yeah.
So we may or may not see a lot of COVID-inspired songs on the next record, whenever that might be.
I would say so, yes. It's likely, yes. I would say isolation will become a theme of some description. Yes. The dog is I'm now trying to service the dog because it's dug a hole in the backyard and my wife will kill me. So
oh, goodness. Oh, well, I'll let you get back to that. Just one last thing, though, before I let you go. How do you think you look back on this album a few years down the track, given the state of the world at the moment? Will it, at the time of its release, will always have that connection to you?
Oh, I think so, yeah. Yeah, it's really life-changing, I think, for everyone, really. I mean, the whole notion of witnessing this complete economic wind down and then just pulling ourselves back up out of the hole, it's completely new. It's a completely fresh experience for humanity, you know? I mean, to grapple with a disease like this, it's never happened before in human history. So, I mean, we live in interesting times.
Sure do. Okay, Mark, well, I'll let you get back and patch up your backyard before too much damage is done. Thanks so much for your time, and congratulations on a great record, a wonderful collection of songs, and it's great to catch up with you again.
Good on you, mate. Cheers.
Thanks, Mark. Cheers. Bye.